I grew up in a small town named Ansonia in Connecticut, and the neighbors were quite nice. You could just walk up on their porch, sit down, and visit with people. It was that kind of a town, and people knew each other, and you knew them, and they cared about you. It wasn't perfect, but it was a nice town. I liked my teachers, I liked my neighbors, I liked the kids I grew up with overall. And there was a lot of nice things to do. For instance, on the weekends, Dad would take us on these long drives in the country, and we would go on these winding roads through the farm fields and villages, and there was this one particular place that had maple sugar candy, pumpkins, and apples of all sorts. I didn't know there were that many apples, but there was hundreds of apples. Varieties for pies and varieties for just eating, and sour, sweet, and all things in between. So it was a pretty decent world to grow up in the southern part of Connecticut. And I've told you before, I believe, about the different ships at sea we could see from Long Island in West Haven at the beaches there, looking for hours at the different ships. There was cargo and all sorts of crews and military and just day sailors. It was a pretty neat life. It was a community, and where I work at now was a community. I've been there for 10 years, and I enjoy it. I enjoy the people I work with. It's like a family. So you get that, and I believe that was one of God's original ideas for man, was that we would be like looking out for our neighbors, and we'd be like a family, people caring about each other, and though it's not a perfect world by any stretch. One of the things I remember about both Connecticut and Minnesota was the wonderful potlucks that the churches had. They had these dishes that go back quite a ways, generations in fact, some of them. And it was just so much fun to be invited when you didn't have a whole lot of money, and they'd say, well, that's all right, you just bring a little dish and that'll pay enough for it, and or you just come on in and we'll overlook the fee this time, which meant almost every time. But it was a pretty neat way to get to know people, and the food was phenomenal, and I enjoyed the people a lot, particularly in the churches that I went to in both Connecticut and Minnesota. So I think that, like I said, I think that was part of God's original plan, was to make people to be like a family, to be looking out for each other, to be caring. And the scripture seems to speak a lot about that. In Revelations 20 it says, look, God's dwelling is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will exist no longer. Grief, crying, and pain will exist no more, because the previous things have passed away. So when those things are gone, we will have the family that we were meant to have. As we look into the future, the believers have that hope, and it's a wonderful hope. I can remember going back, like I said, to Minnesota and visiting some friends, and we hadn't seen each other for 8 years, I guess it was, something like that. It'd been a long time, but as we sat, we just started talking, and we were talking about nothing, this, that, and nothing, but it was a lot of nice nothing, and it was really great. And Bill says to me, this is really nice, just hanging out. We were watching TV, but we weren't watching it, the three of us. Randy, Bill, and myself. And I remember those days when we used to walk on those trails all the time. And it was a lot of fun. And we would do the same thing, talking about nothing. But there was a lot of something to that nothing. So, in any case, I hope you have a blessed day. And I hope you can have a lot of somethings in your nothings. God bless.